All right. So we have Cielle Backstrom here, my friend from many years. And I wanted to talk to her for a lot of different reasons. So I'm going to give a little bit of a background on why I'm doing this. I'm really trying to explore this idea of courage. And also, especially, we could say courage in the context of what we might think of as a heroic journey. And I want to explain a little bit about what I mean by that. I actually want to start by assuming, for the most part, that whoever might be watching this video, that we don't share any necessarily lingo or jargon or concepts, that we're sort of starting from a clean slate in terms of our speech, and that like, for example, something like the hero's journey, that's not necessarily something that everyone thinks about all the time. So what I mean by the hero's journey for me is that we are constantly being sort of pushed out on the edge of our life, from what we might think of as relative stability and order into areas that are much less certain and may contain much more risk. And we may be called out into those areas for all kinds of different reasons. We may be exploring, or in other words, we may be voluntarily going out to these liminal areas, or we may be thrust out into those areas by some circumstance that comes out of the blue, some anomaly, something that we never expected is entering the picture of our lives, and we have to find out, okay, how in the world are we going to navigate now that this has happened? And I'm not going to give a lot of background on exactly how I personally arrived at this point of wanting to explore this topic, because that's a long story all by itself, and I want to be able to spend more time on your journey. But I think maybe that's enough to establish the basic idea that when you're in such territory, faced with what may seem like existential threats, or obstacles that you have no idea how to get through or around, what serves you then is courage. And what I notice in my own life is that I tend to gravitate towards the people and the stories of people who have chosen to jump out on the edge, or even if they're not choosing it, but they've been faced with something like a catastrophe, and they navigate that new life that they're living with courage. So just a little bit by way of introduction, I've known Cielle, I don't know, have we known each other for 20 years, maybe?
I actually think I first met you probably close to 40 years ago, Daniel.
Really?
Wait. That's another story we'll discuss at some point in time, but I think I did meet you in Switzerland.
Really?
Yeah, okay. Way back.
Okay. So we both were involved um, with the practice of meditation and the transcendental meditation movement, and we both have been involved in spiritual community that at various times has gone under the different names, but the one that it was when we were in that community was Waking Down in Mutuality. And I think this is good. I think this is a good start. And what I'd like you to do, Cielle, is just describe a little bit about what you do, because you have a very unique role in the world and in life and in your community. I want to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just speak briefly about, in a nutshell, what I do, but also some of those kind of hero's journeys that you talked about is actually what led me to doing what I do. And then I would like to talk about them too. So basically what I do, I sort of gave myself a label that I assist people in embodied awakening. And I do this through sometimes just having conversations with people and meeting them exactly where they are. And there's something to me, very magical and alchemical about just letting someone be in the witness of someone else who's willing to be radically acceptance of who they are in this moment, because change happens in the now. And if we can just embrace the present moment, the now, often patterns that feel stuck or problematic just start to melt. Just the same way as if you put ice in a warm place, it starts to melt, because that's what it does. If you put people in front of other people who are willing to believe that you are divine, that divinity starts to just unfold in the other person. So I don't really do a lot other than just support people. I also support people through some energy work that I've learned, mostly based on Peruvian traditions. And I have a couple of little tools in my bag that's I kind of pull out according to the person to see what we can do, just to let their life find itself in wholeness. And I enjoy what I do a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe
you've done some training of different kinds. Can you talk?
Yeah. So I did get trained as a transcendental meditation teacher years ago. That was probably close to 40 years ago that I got that training. And I then I also had a career as a mom, a full-time mom for quite a while. And that was a beautiful and also heroine's journey. As anyone who's a parent knows, the open-heartedness and the heartache that happens as a result of raising children. They were some of my best spiritual teachers. Then in the last more 20 years, I was trained as a first Waking Down and Mutuality teacher. We've since changed our name to Trillium Awakening. But I also was certified by the Four Winds Society, who is a group that's based on energy medicines of both North and South America, with the primary focus on Peru. But I've also been to Peru. I've spent about 380 days in Peru in the last 10 years, just working with indigenous people there, and also working with sacred plants medicines there. And I've also done certification in a psychotherapeutic methodology called interrelationship focusing. And more recently, my husband Jeffrey and I were certified in a psychospiritual path called holotropic breathwork. Holotropic means like a heliotropic plant turns towards the sun. This idea is that a holotropic organism turns towards wholeness when given a chance. And so it's just, again, a process of allowing people to, for the most part, remove the blocks that are keeping us from moving towards wholeness. That's what I find, is that we are incredible biospiritual organisms. Just like if you cut yourself, the body knows how to heal that cut. We also know how to bring ourselves to wholeness, although sometimes there's obstacles that are in the way, internal obstacles in the way. And so most of the processes I use help people to remove those obstacles so that they just naturally move towards the whole divine being that they are. And it's very satisfying work. I love it.
So I want to ask you more about what you mean by wholeness.
What do I mean by wholeness? Yeah, that's a good question. Let me go back to this, the very first experience that I can recall that was life-shattering and life-changing, because it will also point towards that it would set me on my journey of being a embodied awakening person. And so I was probably around 15 and had an experience at night. So this was not a external something that happened to me, like you'd even talked about cataclysmic events that can really break things open and turn things around. This was something that happened to me while I was sleeping. And as a result of being 15, the only word I had for it at the time was maybe a dream. And yet there was a deep sort of ownership that this was not a dream. But I didn't know what else to call mental activity that happens and visions that happen at night when you don't seem to have wakefulness going on. And this particular internal event that happened, I also was nearly impossible for me to put words to it, because the only words I could put to it was like I was shown the perfection of the universe, except for that the way that perfection manifested for me was absolute nothingness. And yet there was this quality that it contained everything in unmanifest form, and it was therefore perfect. I might have also described it as being something like it was the most thunderous silence you could ever imagine. It was completely silent, but it was as if it contained all sound at high volume. And yet there was nothing to hear. And it was eternally expanded. There was no end to it. There was no beginning to it. And again, it was really hard for me to find terms. Like, I was a teenager at the time, obviously. I said I was 15. And recently, around that time, someone had just been able to run a mile in under 4 minutes, which was thought at the time to be nearly impossible. And in my mind, in this terms of this vision that I had, this vision of nothingness was, we will keep beating that 4-minute mile. In fact, there will come a time when we will be able to run that mile in 0 time, because we will know that we're at both ends at the same time. There'll be no time that will be needed to get from one to the other. And again, this is the 15-year-old mind that doesn't know how to put words to the experience that she had, other than that it was an experience of everything, all things, and that I was that. I was also this everything, all thing in seed form. It's like if you gave me an acorn, it is the tree, but it hasn't yet completely grown into that mighty oak. And I had the only word that I could also feel represented what I became and knew in that moment was God. But it did not sound like the God that I had been taught about in any religious training that I'd had. But, and so that was a little bit of made me literally feel like I was maybe going crazy, because I could not believe that I was the only one in the universe to have had this kind of experience. And yet I hadn't been exposed to anyone that spoke about these kind of experiences. So it also felt dangerous for me to speak about it, because I thought I might be labeled crazy. So it was a big, huge turn everything upside down, because what is this happening to me? Am I crazy? Am I knowing something that's really profoundly true and others know but don't want to talk about it? So it did set me on a kind of a quest. And so again, I'm wanting to tie this back to your question about wholeness, but you go ahead and ask a question.
One quick question. So how old were you then?
I was 15.
15. Okay, good.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was, I didn't really know exactly who to go to and who to seek out. But getting back to that, what is this wholeness question that you asked me?
Mm-hmm.
This, if my words have meant anything to anyone that's speaking right now, these are pointers towards what I mean by wholeness. And I think it's a Buddhist kind of, again, I love the fact that you said, let's not use jargon. I don't really know Buddhism, but I've heard that this is a Buddhist expression that the teachers only point to the truth that they're pointing at. The actual truth has to be known internally. And so that pointing that I'm trying to do about this experience that I had, which was of just a total unitive experience, that I was one with everything in the universe. And that was my most natural existential state. You use that word existential on the most fundamental level. That was who I was. I was unbound. I was eternal. I was connected to everything in creation. Now, that experience lasted only a short period of time. And to be honest with you, it might have only lasted, by clock time, maybe a few seconds, maybe at the most 5 or 10 minutes. But it itself was on time. It was timeless. It couldn't be clocked by the clock.
Right.
And so those are kind of the things. Now, I don't expect that everyone I work with is going to have this kind of epiphanal, blown out, unitive experience. But I think we can all relate on some level. I think we've all had moments in life where we feel right with the world, where we feel connected in some level. And I would like to help people build on those moments.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't become kind of happen by, quote, grace. Like, oh, it fell upon me. Like this experience, it fell upon me. But I've learned over time to cultivate that experience so that it isn't just a fluky thing that happened once in my life. It's something that can be cultivated to be understood and cherished, but as a continual process as opposed to a one-time flash. So I'm going to throw it back to you, Daniel, to ask another question.
Well, just so I'm going to try to summarize what I understand about that, which is that what you're calling wholeness is some sort of a ongoing, you could say, movement in your life towards an experience where everything is, you could say, integrated with maybe like all various different aspects of the universe. Like this experience that you described was as you described it, as sort of a one-time experience that fell upon you, but it had a lot of qualities that could be, you might say it had a lot of qualities that could be very useful in daily life. It had a quality of knowing about it, a sense of inner knowing that like you're having this revelation that the march of time causes us to be able to develop greater capabilities or competence. You made reference to the breaking of the 4-minute mile barrier and the idea that perhaps that accomplishment could be brought into even less time. And we could come back to that because, now we're theorizing that, time itself could somehow or other collapse. And I don't think we're quite ready for that yet.
No, I don't think we are either. Absolutely.
Straight there. But I think generally, does this make sense that we're engaged in an ongoing process towards something that is an experience in which we can embrace maybe, more of life or even all of life? Does that make sense?
I love the way you're summing this up, Daniel. I'm just like more of life and maybe even all of life. But that is a beautiful statement. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I feel like it's helpful to me because, for example, the idea of awakening, which is incredibly, I would say it's an incredibly popular idea in spiritual circles, implies some sort of definitive transition towards kind of like a permanent recognition of the experience that you had when you were 15. And one of the things that I have become very interested in over time is the fact that people, well, a good way to say it is that people do better or they do worse. Like in daily life, you look around the community and you find people that are sort of meeting the challenges that they're facing, and some people are in very, very difficult circumstances. But there's something in them that steps forward and not only makes their own life better, but also helps to make the lives around them better. And I don't know to what extent you could consider those people awake in the, in the sort of common parlance of awakening. It's kind of awakening sometimes is used in the same way that something like the word enlightenment is used. And so this vision that you're describing about moving in your life towards wholeness does relate to those common experiences of the choice that we have in our daily lives to either make things better or make things worse. And, the vision that you're kind of opening up for people is a path of what it seems like to me is to make things better and better and better and better and better and better, like a continuous path of betterment through self-understanding and moving through various different obstacles that are mainly inside with how we view the world. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like that last thing that you said about the obstacles being mainly inside, and maybe how we view the world or how we interpret the world. Because I don't want people to when I like the way you said, making life better and better and better and better, but also for me it includes no exclusion. So it doesn't, there's no exclusion here. So even part of the better is including the all. And as we all know, a lot of the all of life are things that are tragic, that are heartbreaking, that are that, we don't believe should be part of life, and yet we find that they are. And there can be some unnecessary pain of believing that they shouldn't be part of life.
Okay, this is really, really significant, what you just said. Mm-hmm. And I want to put it in the context of something else that I've been thinking about and considering a lot lately, which is that there are two things that appear to be part of life that, for the most part, I have observed we don't have a lot of tools for dealing with. And mostly it has to do with the beginning of the problem is that we have trouble actually acknowledging that these things exist. The two things are tragedy and malevolence. Like, some people don't actually want to believe that like evil things exist in the universe. Mm-hmm. And that's probably a whole debate all by itself. But if you can believe that there's something good, then the opposite always exists. And it's not really hard to look around either the realm of history or the realm of the whole world to see examples of malevolence. So the problem is that when malevolence shows up in my life, I don't really know how to deal with it necessarily. I feel like I'm getting better at it. Tragedy is a different thing. I mean, tragedy is something that does not seem to be related to anybody's volition. Tragedy is something that happens and everybody's like, well, that's tragic. That should have never happened. And maybe there has been somebody's volition involved. But the reason why I love what you said is that what I understand you're saying is that you're trying to cultivate a kind of state of being, maybe we could call it, where one can absorb all of those not necessarily fantastic influences that occur in a person's life. Is that true?
No, yeah, you're hearing me. And again, I also want to make it clear that it doesn't mean that we aren't responsive to, quote, negative energies and things like that. I mean, I think it's healthy to have boundaries, and these malevolence that come our way, whether they're energetic or they're just completely, true. I mean, like someone is actually burgling our house kind of thing. We do engage in ways that are life supporting to us. But I think we get this kind of imbalance where we try to push away everything that we perceive as being negative. It's like not wanting winter to come or something like that. It's just like, no, it's part of the cycle of nature. We might not like it. We may think it's a time of death and hibernation, but we don't push it away. Either literally try to push it away, or nor do we have to wish it away. I mean, we can just embrace and accept it, and yet engage and flex and dance with it.
So in your life, you sent me a list of a number of things that have been journeys for you. Would you like to talk about those?
If any of them feel appropriate to you in this moment, why don't you bring them up? What feels right to you, Daniel?
Well, what I wanted to do was to just get a sense of how courage had operated in your particular life, especially having this vantage point, because what I hear is kind of an overarching you're describing a call early in your life. This experience for you was like a call.
Yes.
Like this is going to be very central to my life. I need to sort of reconcile this experience that I've had that seems to be beyond the realm of everything that people are telling me exists, and somehow or other see where that fits in with my, ordinary life, and maybe even have something to do with sharing that with other people.
Yeah, right. Definitely.
Do you have that sense that you wanted to be able to share some of that experience with others?
No, that's such a good question, because on the one hand, I had the sense that I was supposed to share it with other people, while I was scared, really scared. Talk about courage to share it with other people, especially because I didn't know if it meant I was crazy. And I didn't know that I would be accepted at all for the sort of vision that of humanity that I'd had. So it felt like a huge responsibility, especially for myself. I know a lot of teenagers feel like, oh, I'm ready to take on the world. And I'm going like, I'm not ready to take this on. But I also had a kind of more about, there was, I would say this was a lot of grace in that it landed on me. I didn't invoke it. I didn't expect it. It just landed on me. And part of the grace was the teaching of it is, sharing of this is actually an invitation, and that it was up to me to decide to step forth to accept that invitation. Mm-hmm. So there was kind of a strong invitation, like the world needs this, and you've received this vision. It's would be nice for you to do this, and yet it still is an invitation. And so it literally was something I kind of sat with I've sat with it for decades. I mean, I tried to think that it was just a dream. It could have been easy to rationalize. It was just a dream after all, and dreams aren't real and not true, but that didn't really sit right with me. But the next sort of phase in life when I was 19, I did learn transcendental meditation, and we've brought that up already today. And it was only in the first few moments of meditation, literally, that I thought, for the first time, I'm not crazy. There is this field of silence that we can access so easily. And that field that I'm just noticing for the first few moments of being instructed feels to be of the same cloth that this more blowout nighttime experience I had 4 years earlier. And so that made me feel like, oh, this is something that people know about, that people teach. It's not taught maybe so often in US, but some man who's come from India is teaching this. So I began to feel less afraid, and one of the first steps that I did was to become a teacher of TM. Mm-hmm. And I did that, pretty much full time for several years, really enjoyed that. And yet I also felt at the same time I was a little hiding behind the TM organization, right, and not really owning my own direct experience and speaking about my own direct experience. And so that's why I'm saying it was kind of for decades that I kind of kept getting these little nudges and nags, like, you need to bring yourself forward a little bit with this message, as opposed to just offering a technique, which I think was still beautiful. Offering the technique was beautiful, but I wasn't quite so personally transparent, right, about what I felt I knew. So that's, was something I still had to keep kind of, when you say courage, it took me a little more courage to kind of lean on myself. Well, appropriately.
I want to just recognize those two aspects of courage that you embodied through those passages. The first thing that occurred to me when you were talking is I heard or read recently, I think it was in a lecture that I was watching, that that Carl Jung, this depth psychologist, described how shamans often go through a period of what anyone else might call like a mental breakdown. Mm-hmm. And I think that happens in a variety of ways, but it's their ability to come through and somehow or other internally reorder their universe, right, that gives them the capacity to do the work, whatever is needed, in a village or community, in the way that shamans traditionally have supported their communities. And also, the whole question of okay, a person goes to a therapist because they have mental problems, mm-hmm. That's completely a societal construct. I mean, it's like it's completely related to the thing of at the time when you were having this experience, if you had told a bunch of people, well, this is what life is, you rightfully had a fear that people would think, okay, she's kind of gone off her rocker. Whereas, I think now culturally it's far more popular for people to talk about their revelatory experience that just happened spontaneously and kind of awake in a way that no one usually is awake. So, so being able to kind of move ahead through that experience and hold it, and then you had the experience of dropping into something like that with the TM technique, mm-hmm. And then this I love your expression that you were learning that you had to become more transparent, mm-hmm. And I think one of the first times I realized, okay, I think it was at a concert that I gave with my daughter in Fairfield, and afterwards you sang a song to me. I can't remember what the song was, but you sang, I don't know why you sang the song. You sang the song because you had the song and you wanted to share the song. But it was one of the first times that I realized the power that you have as a person, because you're willing to come forward like that in a very personal way, holding your whole self. And that's a rare gift. Not very many people do that. And I think I'm just going to take a slight digression just for the sake of our audience watching this. At a certain point, maybe it was 4 or 5 years ago, Cielle commissioned me to do a piece. I don't even know exactly how this took place. It was like when I was offering these one-day works where I was just going to come up with something on the spur of the moment. And I created a piece around Cielle's name. Cielle means the sky. And I'm going to post that piece. It's actually on the online version of my latest CD called Love's Hidden Demands. Cielle, the sky. But I feel like I'm bringing this up because I feel like you have grown over your life, as I have seen it, into embodying that name, which is very beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Solo international traveling. Can you talk about that?
Solo international traveling.
Is it on the list?
It is on the list. Yes, I will talk about it. And then I want to talk a little bit about also the sort of how I got into this more energy healing.
Good.
But solo internationally traveling, again, I was just only maybe a few weeks past my 18th birthday when a girlfriend of mine and I decided that we would go to Europe for 4 months. And after the first about 3 weeks, she decided that her life would be better spent back in the United States. And I decided to continue to travel in Europe for about close to 4 months on my own, a little more than 4 months on my own. And I didn't really know at the time. I guess I had a lot of confidence as a young 18-year-old woman traveling by myself with also not enough money, and which meant, I kind of thought, you could just sleep on the beach and you can sleep on the park benches, and you can sleep on trains and you can sleep on train stations and things like that, because I didn't have enough money to actually often afford to even stay at a youth hostel. So I think that I felt like, in terms of just plain old raw courage, not like, kind of spiritual courage, that was quite a courageous thing for an 18-year-old to do. And I was relatively well protected during that time. But I also would just mention for anyone that's listening, there is that kind of Me Too movement that's happening right now. And during those 4 months, I had a couple of very significant Me Too experiences that I wouldn't wish other 18-year-olds to have.
Yeah. Right. I have, in the process of contemplating this topic of courage, I have thought about the relationship between courage and naivete and foolishness.
Good point.
From a sort of a mythological standpoint, the fool is often the precursor to the hero. Like there's something, like I relate to this from the point of view of the journey that I went on around the country, doing house concerts everywhere. I took off in this van that wasn't roadworthy at all, and I didn't really have a plan, and I thought I could survive, and it took me quite a while to realize that essentially I was homeless and stuck on the road, and was kind of living by the grace of various different kinds of blessing from different people. I think what happened is that I developed courage over that time, and that I departed on the journey with a certain amount of naivete and a certain amount of just foolishness. It was like a lot of people could have said, well, that's a foolish idea, but it worked out. And sometimes when you go on journeys like that are dangerous, you don't necessarily quite reckon with what the danger might be. So that's all, I think it's all involved in the heroic journey, because, if you look at a story like Odysseus, like Odysseus was not the Odyssey, it was not like, on the money all the time. He was like screwing up half the time, and just figuring things out as he went along, because he was confronting things that were way beyond what he could have even imagined when he started out.
Yeah. No, thank you. I love that sort of looking at this, how that tie-in between foolishness, naivete, and courage. Like, so that maybe, again, I couldn't have done anything different than what I did, but was it foolish and naive? Yeah, very much so. I just thought I could I thought I was more invincible.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Perhaps I really was. So I didn't go out as protected, but did I learn? Absolutely. I learned all kinds of things. It was really important for me to, leave the nest of California, which I was raised in, and just go to some places that were culturally so different, and have my mind really stretched. So those were important, formative.
I go further down the list, but I want to give you the last 15 minutes or 10 or so minutes that we have to just kind of say whatever else that you want to share. And I don't think this is going to be our last conversation.
I hope it's not our last conversation, but I did want to go back to more of these kind of more noumenal or experiences. By noumenal, I mean just kind of beyond the normal, everyday, conscious thinking mind, because I wanted to tie it back into the idea of this energy healing that I also got drawn into. And again, this was a time, although this was, many, many decades later, probably in my, who knows what I was, close to 50 or something like that. It was probably around that. I was also in a workshop, and the workshop included some meditation. And during the meditation period, with my eyes closed, we'd had a period of open-eyed meditation, which kind of was very activating for me, and then a time maybe of 10 minutes of closed meditation with no formal instruction, just, be with yourself. And during that time, again, some spontaneous inner experiences started happening for me that I was a little troubled by. Again, am I going crazy? And one of them was, for instance, I would hear the wind blowing outside, and as I put my attention on the wind, it was like I became the wind. And it was like, this is kind of strange, but how do I know I'm the wind? I knew that I was the wind in the same way that I know I'm a woman. I just know that. You know what you are when you are it. And then I thought, that was kind of interesting. What if I put my attention on another element? Like, instead of air, what if I put my attention on water? And I became water, and I knew the ocean, and I knew the lakes, and I knew the tears, and I knew the rivers, and I knew the rain from inside out. And it was just very kind of fascinating. So I used another element. Like I said, what if I was fire, and I became fire? And then I played a little bit more. I thought, what if I, instead of an element, I became like an animal? So like, what if I became jaguar, and there was jaguar, and from the inside out? And this is all internal experiences. And then I thought, how about a star? And I became a star. And I even knew like what age of a star I was. Like, I knew that I was kind of a youngish star, not a really brand new baby star, but kind of young, in the same way like we know in life, are we kind of old aged or young or something like that. So it did feel very bizarre and strange and a little like, again, I'm going crazy kind of stuff. And after the meditation period was over, one of the teachers just said, does anyone have anything that you need to bring into the room before we continue with this workshop? And I reluctantly raised my hand and shared my experience. And this time, as opposed to the dream I'd had at 15, instead of like, I don't know where to even ask for confirmation or anything, I just, said, this is what happened to me. This person looked at me just very matter-of-factly and said, oh, it sounds like a shamanic journey to me. This kind of connection to the elements and shape-shifting, even though, we didn't see you shift shapes, inside you were. It sounded kind of like a shamanic journey that just happened to you. And maybe there's a message for you there. Maybe you should even look into what it would be, what a shaman is. And, it wasn't a word that was a whole lot in my vocabulary at the time. And then she said, is there anything you need right now? And I said, I just need to go outside for a little while. She said, go ahead, go outside. So I went outside and took my shoes off, and just walked on the earth for a while, kind of like, what was that? Again, it took courage, to admit that I'd had that experience, and what was it? And so then I also decided to start looking into seeing more about what is a shaman, and what is shamanic energy, and what are energy medicines. And again, based on my age, careers that especially women could go into were things like, if you weren't going to be a mom, you were going to be a nurse or a librarian or a school teacher, a secretary. That was it. And nobody, whenever it asked me what you wanted to do, nobody said, and would you like to be an energy healer? So I'd kind of heard about energy healers, but going through you get struck by lightning or something strange like that happens. And I thought, you don't go to school to become an energy healer. And then I found out that you actually can. So I started enrolling in courses on energy healing. And then also, like I said, my husband and I have spent, more than a year scattered over probably 15 trips and working directly with energy healers there, medicine people there. And that has been mind-blowing and mind-expanding, and all kinds of lovely openings have happened as a result of that. But it was, again, starting with that sort of, I don't know what happened, that seemed kind of strange on an internal knowing level. And then taking that internal knowing and following it, following it into training and into, helping other people. You want to try something with me today, sort of thing. And that's been a really, again, sort of a beautiful part of my journey. So I'm going to hand it back to you and see if you have any questions about that or.
Well, okay, so I have a practical question and then another question, which might be a big one for us to go out on. Yeah. Are we going to be done in 7 minutes? You have another appointment?
I actually have a half an hour break. So yeah, we could go on if you want to, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I think what I have in mind is to talk about this next thing, and then if you're open to it, maybe see if we can have another conversation sometime in the future, because I feel like this has been really good, and I feel like we're almost just scratching the surface of what might be possible when we sort of think about courage and think about the journeys that you've been on and the ways that you help other people. So I'll come to the question, which is, do you think that when you sit with someone and hear whatever it is that they're going through, and in the various kinds of work that you're doing with them, do you think that there is any part of that has to do with activating courage in them?
Yeah, no, it's such a beautiful question. I actually do think it has to do with, well, first of all, some kind of activation. And again, it depends on how generally we use this word courage. But I think that a lot of people don't have the courage to believe in themselves. Right. They don't have the courage to step forth in their own power. And so if we're using courage in that way, then yes, right, absolutely. There is an activation of courage that can happen. And I don't think I'm unique in being able to activate that in people, but yeah, I encourage people.
Well,
and by encouraging them, they have courage to be who they are.
right. See, I think this I think this project of being who you are,
Mm-hmm.
having the courage to be who you are, to be able to begin to speak things that are real to other
Yeah,
people.
right.
You know, to be able to take certain actions in your life that are not easy actions to take.
Mm-hmm.
That project of owning the power that you have, the agency that you have as an individual, is something that appears to be a struggle for a lot of people,
Yeah.
And needs people like you to assist in the process. You know, I mean, like you say, there's lots of different ways that courage might be activated, but it feels like the work that you're doing is helpful in that really fundamental way of like, okay, bringing your resources around you and bringing yourself to the task of becoming more of who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And I am receiving what you're saying. And at the same time, I just want to let you know that I feel like you're doing the same thing, Daniel, especially through your music. I mean, I have also sat listening to your music, both recorded music and especially in live concerts. And you activate things in people. Your music, and especially the way you combine music with poetry. There are poems that I'd heard many times, and they never reached deeply into my soul until I heard you say those words. Because again, the way you say them, the pauses that you bring into them, the elongation of certain words, they maybe then playing a little bit of a cello between two verses or something like that of a poetry, allowed something to open up inside of me that I didn't know was there.
Right.
And so, I mean, what I'm loving, one of the things I'm loving about this conversation is that we can all inspire and activate each other.
Yes.
And we have to find the different ways that we do that for each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My partner, Elle, is working with me on this project, and this is something that she started talking about, because one of the basic things that I'm trying to do is find people, like initially in our community, but also eventually around the country, who seem to me to be especially courageous. So there's something about their story that really embodies that heroic journey, and create a piece of music about them. Essentially, like give them an award, you know, with the music, and you know, celebrate them and recognize them with others in the community, which we've already done one award show. And as a beautiful woman here in the community who builds bridges with people. She's Costa Rican, and she does what she calls training on cultural agility. So for all the different kinds of people that are coming into the area, she helps people understand, you know, how best to work with each other. So building bridges, and there's a whole backstory about her and everything like that. But what Elle said is that, okay, she said, well, you have a gift. She was talking to me. You have the gift of making music, and by recognizing the gift of this woman, Hilda, you're magnifying her gift.
Oh, yeah.
And the whole experience of doing the show where everybody's there kind of just magnifies the fact that we all have gifts, you know, and that is really exciting to me, because I really do believe that we do all have gifts, and we're not always using those as well as we could, or even if we are, it's not really being recognized. And to the extent that we can see those things in each other and magnify them, we're making the world better by doing that.
I agree.
Yeah. So, so thank you very much for
Thank you.
taking this time. I definitely hope that we can schedule another conversation somewhere along the line, because I'm going to be doing these interviews, but I think we've touched on just the beginnings of some things that I want to spend more time talking about in terms of the work that you do.
I love that. It sounds great.
Okay, beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll see you later.
Okay, thank you, Daniel.